Hello, everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today, we say hello to John Musser, creator of Programmable Web. Hey, John, thanks for joining. How are you doing?
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks a lot for being here. It's really interesting to talk to you, hear about your experiences, and you've been in the API space for such a long time that I'm sure you have a lot of interesting things with us to share. Very briefly, let's go over what happened after Programmable Web. I know you've been at Ford now for a long time. So what have you been up to at Ford?
You know, it's funny because it's actually been 2005 was when we started Programmable Web, right? So that's a long time in the API.
That's a very long time, yeah.
Right? What is that? 16, 17 years now. But the last 5 years, I've been at Ford in a variety of different roles. I came here because it's through the API connection, really. Automotive and Ford are all going through this big, giant transformation right now, more so than the last 100+ years, primarily driven around connectivity, electrification, software-defined vehicles. So much of it is about software and platforms that was really appealing to me. You take this iconic brand name, Ford, that we all know, cars, which people are really passionate about. It's a physical thing. But at the same time, all this disruption around digitization and cloud and software and APIs. And so that was all exciting. So that's how I went up to Ford. And then again, I had a couple different roles, but currently I'm in Ford Pro, which is a new division of Ford, spun up last year, focused on the commercial vehicle segment. So when you look around, you realize, oh, all those vans and pickup trucks, 40% of them out there on the market are Ford. So it's a place that we're really strong. Before that, I spent the last 2 years at Ford in the autonomous vehicle group. So we're doing AV testing, pilot programs around self-driving cars. And again, those are all APIs up and down the stack. And then before that, one of the first things I did at Ford was to help create a new team called Platform Enablement. And that was really solely focused on, as any big, large company, Fortune 10, 100, 500 company, lots of API groups building APIs throughout the company and wanting to do some, external API development as well. So we set up a team to become API management, API best practices, sort of federating and helping the other teams learn and come up with a set of tools and metrics around APIs. So that sort of leveraged what I had done in the old Programmable Web days and bring that into Ford and get that ball rolling. So, that's probably one of the things we want to talk about later. So some of the lessons learned from that.
Yeah, that would be great. To me, it's always, when I look at companies that I talk to, right, a lot of times it is those companies, the old ones, the established ones that are not natively digital, that just do some other thing. And they sometimes have maybe the bigger challenges to really adapt to this new world. So I think that's one of the interesting things. Like, how do you actually get like this old, large, successful thing to change path?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I find really interesting with cars, right, is this whole IoT aspect to it, where it's like, it's all around, you have these things on the road, they probably need to be updated, they need information, they should provide information, you have partners that want this information. So this ecosystem must be extremely rich and complex, I'm guessing, and building that up must have been pretty fascinating, I would say.
Yeah, and I think you connect like three big dots there, right? Like there's a big legacy company, been around a century, and again, from an IT perspective, like any big company, all sorts of odds and ends in terms of from acquisitions and legacy systems and so on, and how do you modernize, and culturally, how do you sort of modernize the culture, and then connected to these vehicles that are probably one of the most complex IoT devices you can possibly imagine, right?
Yes.
They make an iPhone seem so simple, right? That's like a tiny subset of it, right? The TCU, the telematics connectivity unit in the vehicle that talks up, that's kind of the modem, and the software, and the hardware and software around it. But part of the challenge, and we don't have time to go into all the details, but there's so much data, right? From a good old IoT perspective. There's so much data that's sort of being generated every second, right? In the AV group, we saw, 25 terabytes a day, or it may not be the exact number, but it was a phenomenal amount of data that we could have collected, right? And you can't. So you have to actually, on vehicle, decide how much you're going to filter out and how much you're going to send back up, right? Because that takes processing and bandwidth and all sorts of limitations, not to mention dollar limitations. Like it's going to cost you money to send that back up to the cloud. And then that third piece of how you got to do an ecosystem around it, right? Like how you go, okay, so now you got these cars, but on the road and trucks, and then stuff in your own data center that you've collected, and then you have third parties, whether it's the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, who these cars are becoming for ride hailing and new business models like that, or delivery, right? All the delivery companies who now are ordering fleets of EVs, right? So electric vehicles are becoming super interesting and relevant to Amazons and FedExes and Walmarts of the world, who now want to modernize their fleet with electric vehicles. And there's no point in having an electric vehicle that isn't connected. You can't buy one, right? That goes with therefore they have APIs, they have platforms, and you're going to want to have APIs allow you to do things on the vehicle, to unlock it, to get access to the data and so on, both from us as an auto manufacturer, but as our partners. So again, you have that very sort of important ecosystem story, and there's a ton of fun ones around that.
Yeah, and I guess another thing that I thought was always very interesting with car manufacturers, I've spoken to some in Germany, right, is the whole OEM story. Like they have all these companies who put their stuff into cars and would like to know more about how their stuff is doing in the field. And then there's also sometimes, this interesting power struggle around, well, who owns the data, who gets access to the data, and then all these kind of things, right? It's also a lot of political things around there.
And like Ford, one of our mottos is to be the world's most trusted company, right? So trust is in the philosophy and the mission of the company. So super careful. So why you can't go right now to just anybody go and sign up to be a developer, right? And get them go, I'm going to get access to that, right? There's all sorts of bad things that can happen, unless you're really careful about these machines. It can kill you, right? So, and it's true for all the OEMs. All the auto manufacturers have the same kind of constraints, right? The regulatory, safety, privacy are fundamental. So again, you're not going to go sign up for the Tesla API tomorrow either, right? That even though seen as being the most forward thinking, there's not developer.tesla.com where you're going to go, hey, I'm going to go hack my car. I mean, people reverse engineer it, right? So there's apps and APIs out there that people reverse engineered for our space, but again, because it's it's so complicated and risky, you have to be super careful about that. So
I do appreciate that it is not super easy to do that. Yes, I think it's nice that cars still are treated as these pretty delicate
as a driver,
things.
right? It's like, oh, yes. I don't want Big Brother to know everywhere I went yesterday. I don't want them to be able to hijack my hackers to hijack my car, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, none of the above, right?
So I think from your experience with Ford and like being in these different roles, you must have seen a lot how you can actually get this done, to go through this big transformation, to build up this IoT centered ecosystem of services and users of those services. And I know that you have come up with these 5 different steps that you think are really important for like a successful digital transformation. I think, given your experience and given how Ford has successfully gone through this transformation, it would be really valuable to go through these 5. So
and I think then they can also touch on some of the other sort of good sidebars in there, right? So I think, so number 1, what we did is we set up a small multidisciplinary team that included product managers, engineers, a designer, some evangelist content people, right? So again, less than 10 people. But it wasn't necessarily your core sort of classic just engineering or product team. This idea of having a small multidisciplinary team, I think, is a very common and a good starting point. And with the mission to, with a good long-term vision, but trying really hard to get the low-hanging fruit and be practical, right? You really need to be able to show the wins early, right? Demonstrate the value, understand some of the complexity, start with a couple of small API-related projects, but don't say, hey, I'm going to open up a public API and have 100 developers or developers. You've seen that one many, in your part of the world, you've seen that many times. It's a classic faux pas, right? Where you think, oh, I read about this developer ecosystem thing. I'm gonna go do this tomorrow, right? Give me that.
And I think that's a very good kind of segue to your second point, right? Where you say it's like you have to look at executive buy-in. And I think like that strategy, right, is a very good way, and it becomes an important part of your story to gain that buy-in.
Right, because and I think that's one of the great things that I've experienced at Ford, which is, from the CEO on down, they get the importance of the digital transformation, of the disruption, even the APIs that start to the platform story that starts to trickle in there. And so with that buy-in, sort of working this all the way down, makes it much easier for folks who are sort of on the ground building this stuff to get whatever you need, the budget, the time, the space to go make it happen. So that's definitely an important step. Number 2 is that executive buy-in, and with them understanding, and really, because you're going to hit bumps on the way, right? It's not going to be like, oh, it's all wine and roses, right? That's not the way it's going to work. And so you gotta, it's not just a short term, 6-month win, right? So.
And then after, and I think that's a really important aspect, but actually, you said we would have sidebars, so I'm asking you about one sidebar here. So one of the things that I see more and more, and my personal name for that is the execution gap, that in a lot of organizations, what I see is there is like this executive general idea, of course, of, yes, we need to do digital things, and oftentimes even the word API shows up.
Right.
But then when you look at what are you really doing to make sure you have good APIs, to make sure that people know what a good API is, that people understand how to use APIs to improve the way they do business, then oftentimes there is not that much in place. So this, what we call an API program, and to really make sure that things happen, that part sometimes is just missing, even though on the very high level, you do have this kind of this grand mission statement. So I'm wondering, is that something maybe also that you may have experienced initially, or have you seen that somewhere? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So it's a fit, and I like that phrase, the execution gap, because it really does capture what happens. I seen it at Ford, but I've done between Programmable Web, and since then done consulting and been involved in the industry for the last 15 plus years. And so I've seen so many cases like that, right? Where either the ambition's too grand, or you kind of don't know what the ABCD steps are, the 1, 2, 3, wait, okay, it sounds great, but actually, how do I do it? How do I make that happen in my own reality, right? I see that it's not just to like the older legacy companies. It happens to the big top 100 tech companies. They struggle too. It's not like, oh, just because I'm Google or whoever that it's all magic, right? It's not like, again, it doesn't really, it's challenging anywhere, right? So then this is sort of within the Ford story. We invested in a company in Silicon Valley in Palo Alto called Autonomic.ai, which you can go to and see, Autonomic.ai. And that might have been 2017 or so. And so that was sort of saying, okay, we're going to do so. And their mission was to enable taking the data off of vehicles and then putting them into the cloud, and then building beautiful RESTful API, rationalizing that data, and then enabling ecosystems on top of it, right? That was...
I've seen that company, yes. I ran into it at some point, yes.
Yeah. And so we ultimately acquired them a couple of years later. So there were multiple investors, and we were originally the lead investor. We acquired them, so they're now part of the Ford. And actually, I think I'm not 100% sure, but I believe almost every vehicle that rolls off of our assembly plant now, they're all connected. So they're all connected to the internet. You can disable that if you want. You don't have to. There's a consent that's involved, but they're all internet connected vehicles. And then B, the vast majority of them are now using software from autonomic AI to help pull that data off the vehicle, pull it up to the cloud, and then create classes of APIs, feed streaming APIs and other APIs, historical APIs, command and control APIs on top of that allow you to get the data or control certain things again in the vehicle. And we use it ourselves, so we dog food it, right? So that's used by a lot of our internal teams, and use that same platform. So that was one chunk of it. So okay, we had that separately, and then on the internal side, again, like so many companies, we had all these different systems of different age and technology stacks and so on. But we were using a couple of different API gateways. So what we started to do with the team that I helped set up, that small multidisciplinary team, we said, okay, let's go find a few pilot projects within there that we can use to start to do automation. So you want to start to automate things like API publishing, API key management, and not of reinventing the wheel. So we're using third-party API management and so on. But thinking about, and our pillars were automation, API cataloging, so gradually building up an internal catalog of the APIs that we had, like an inventory. The automation, which was like CI/CD as well, DevOps automation, right, around APIs. Then we had API standards, best practices, guidance, right, that sort of internal. And again, we didn't reinvent the wheel. We looked in the industry and said, okay, there's a lot of very good API style guides. So we adopted a couple of those for ourselves internally. And then had a practice to go out with internal teams to help teach them how to fish, right? So they knew how to do these things. And then related to that was also actually for us with SRE, like site reliability, systems reliability engineering, because we felt that was very tied to the kind of thing we want to federate within Ford's internal teams. So that was kind of our initial pillars.
Yeah. I just wanted to point out that we're already in the third important thing here, just for our viewers, right? That like what you do, you should have some core pillars in mind that you follow, like you said, automation, cataloging, these kind of things, guidelines. I like the phrase that you use, teach them how to fish. That's a good one.
Right.
And yeah. So that's
centralize it, right? Because you're not going to scale by centralizing everything, right? That's a bottleneck, right? Or an old school like Department of No or whatever. We don't want people in a queue, right? And the metrics, I think, are really important, right? Because you think about, and you've seen this many times, think about how many companies don't kind of know, and I mean measurement, not just like API call measurement, but like what's the value? Yeah. What is the API? What is the business value? And can we, we create something called the VDF, the Value Delivery Framework, to try and connect up like the things that were happening at a low level to the high level, ride hailing trips served, or packages delivered, or miles traveled that we've tracked, or, systems that were number of systems integrated, those sorts of things that, that matter, right? Because what's the point?
Right. Yeah, those do make a bigger difference than counting the number of API calls. That's for sure. That's always just going to be that's a big number. What does it mean?
Right. I remember Dan Jacobson when he was at Netflix, right? And he did great API presentations and advocacy and so on years ago. And one of his questions that he threw out there was like, look, Netflix does, this is like many years ago, 5 billion API calls a day, right? Everything when their world goes through their APIs. But he's like, should that be the success? Is that a faux metric? Like, is that like a faux? Is the API billionaire club like a faux, a missed signal there? Because what if you could have the same amount of value, video streamed or whatever, but with half the API calls? Because then you probably saved money or done it faster or had less bugs or whatever the thing was. Like, API calls is sort of not necessarily the right metric to use, right? That could be
I think that is putting it very friendly. not necessarily the right. Yes,
right,
I agree with that.
right.
Okay, let's move on to your next point that is important on your API journey, or in everybody's API journey for that matter. Innovate for the future, not just for today. And of course, that's really nice because it tells us you should have a vision. Right?
It's think globally, act locally, right? A bit of that as well, right? Because, and think about automotive, right? I think many of us have a gist of it, but the reality is it takes typically 3 to 5 years to create a new vehicle, right? And a lot of that process, like it or not, is waterfallish, right? That's just the way it's been for the last 100 years.
Yes.
It works well for that. And what could be more antithetical to the way that we in the modern cloud world think about developing software? We release 10 times, 100 times a day. And, it's all about kind of the opposite, right? So, part of the solution for that, for in an industry like this is to work on different clock speeds, right? So that, we're able at the software layer to go really quickly. And meanwhile, some things still work on a slower gear. But you don't just accept that as being the way it has to be, right? For example, you may know the phrase OTA, over the air, like OTA updates, right? As they've been happening, Tesla pioneered that for vehicles, right? And Ford now does it, and the other OEMs are doing it, right? As the way to mitigate to the slow speed of having to build, how long it takes to design and build a new, completely new vehicle line. And looking at that as one way to not, when it rolls off the assembly line, right? This is like a big motto for us. It's like, that's not the end of the journey anymore, right?
Yeah.
The future for automotive and many other industries is like, that's not the end. Like that, we now have the ability to keep, and again, through APIs as much as anything, to keep that journey with the customer. Like, we're not saying, hey, see you later, you bought the car, come back in 3 to 5 years when your lease is up. No, that is not the way it should. That is not the way. That is not a successful long-term strategy in our business or anyone now, right? Because now we can stay with you, right? We can make your car smarter. We can make your car better. We can, a couple examples that I really like of things that we've done, again, very API centric in the last couple of years. And seeing that, we set a record here in Seattle the other day for it was like 21 degrees yesterday, which is low for us this time of year. Cold.
Yeah.
Sunny at least. But what happens is I can now, because I have a Ford in my garage, I can turn around and talk to my Amazon Echo device, and I can say, Alexa, start my car, right? And I could do that while I'm getting ready in the house. And then 5 minutes later, I get out to the car, it's ready, it's warmed up, and it's kind of, oh, that's so nice, people. And so we actually have the data to show that our usage is seasonal for that particular feature, because when it gets really cold or really hot, people use that more often because, and you can do it on your phone. So you can, pick up your phone and sort of do it through the Ford Pass app, right? Or you could do it through a Google device, right? So, any smart home. But so there's a bunch of things that come together, right? Connected car, cloud systems, ecosystem, right? So our partners are involved. It's on an Amazon device or, Google device, whatever, right? An iPhone, Android phone, and then looking at innovative ways to kind of, and then it becomes part of my personal journey, right? And so that's, I think, a really good example of a way in which, we've threaded this all together.
Yeah.
Where we're thinking about the future, and then the second one I'll throw in there real quickly, because it's not obvious to most of us as like just Joe car owner, is the business I'm in now, which is the fleet or the commercial business, right? So again, super important, right? Fundamental to whether you're running, a plumbing company or a larger delivery company or a rental company. Your fleet of vehicles it's fundamental. You don't want them off the road, right? You don't want uptime of your vehicle. If I'm a plumber and I can't take my vans down for a day and I can't go see it, well, I'm out of luck. That really hurts my bottom line, right? But now that all the vehicles are becoming connected, and smarter and electric, and ultimately someday self-driving, there's so much opportunity there. And again, think about APIs and ecosystems and platforms, how they, it's APIs up and down, right? Up and down the turtles, up and down the whole stack, right?
APIs all the way. Yes.
All the way down, right? And down in the electronic control units in the device, they have APIs, and then there's the sub networks on the car, and then all the way up and out, right? And then thinking about, here was another good example, was a partnership we did a couple of years ago with Amazon, who had a feature they were piloting called delivery to trunk or delivery to vehicle.
I remember that. Yes.
Right. So that when you order a package, you sit there on your phone or your website, you order something, instead of saying, hey, I want to deliver it to my house or my apartment or whatever, I could say, hey, deliver it to my car. And you had to go through some again, for privacy and other reasons, you had to go through authentication to kind of connect the two up, do your OAuth dance or other things to kind of make the two of them talk to each other. But once you set that up, then you could say deliver to my car, whether your car was at a parking lot or at home or at the office, whatever, that again, the APIs, the Amazon delivery driver could sit in his app, talk to the Amazon cloud, to the Ford cloud, to the vehicle, and go through that whole loop to say, turn off the alarm, unlock the trunk, I'll drop it off. That's all successful. I'll close the trunk, turn it back on, the alarm goes back, the security goes back on, and you get notification back to your phone saying, hey, your package has been delivered.
And all of that, you also need to trust, your car provider, basically, that they only share the location of your car as long as they have to, and all these kind of things, right? I mean, there's also, I think there's a lot of kind of non-technical aspects associated with that as well, right? Like what do we feel comfortable with and these kind of things.
Yeah, for sure.
But these things change over time. So I think, I think that's almost like the most fundamental thing with that point number 4, right? Innovate for the future, not just for today. So maybe now not everybody wants to do these things, but people will want to do more things, and then you're ready for them.
And the innovation, platforms are so important to that, right? Like, because again, you sort of built up this, and you have more use cases of things you hadn't really thought of. And you're opening those doors, right? So I think that is super important.
And now we can jump to the last point, which I think is kind of connected to that, which is start small with the resources available to you. And I think that also nicely wraps it up, right? Don't try to boil the ocean, as you said already, one of my my favorite English phrases. And but still think ahead, right? So I think both of these things combined are good.
Yeah, and small, and also small can be, and again, so dog fooding, right? So small can be, not trying to say, hey, I'm going to do this big open API program from the get-go. Small can be, I'm going to build a handful of APIs that are really important, but I'm going to use them internally, right? So you do those, those internal use cases. For Ford, one of the first ones that was really, fundamental was the Ford Pass app. So the Ford Pass is our consumer facing. Everybody who buys a Ford today, you get the free Ford Pass mobile app on Android and iOS, and then that gives you all sorts of capabilities, but everything in there is API driven, right? Just like most mobile apps, right? So it goes back, it connects into dozens of internal systems, right? So you can see, your lease information, finance type things, or your vehicle history, repair history, or you can see where is it right now, or you can unlock and lock your car. All those things again but they started small, right? So that wasn't really, it wasn't 100 features. It wasn't all that. And so again, super important to kind of just be practical. Be practical.
Yeah, and make sure that you are on a journey that leads to some interesting destination.
Yeah.
Hey, John, thanks so much for sharing all of this with us. I'm sure there's a lot in there for a lot of people who are watching this, because I think a lot of us are on this journey, right? And we're still figuring things out. And it's good to hear.
And if I can, I'll make one plug, which is
yes, of course,
we're hiring. The plug is, I think, for this audience, again, we're, part of this transformation is software engineers, designers, product managers, right? Folks who are building, again, we're happy to have more people who are mechanical engineers and so on. But again, we have a real need for software engineers and designers and product managers, because so much of what we're building is software based. And, we're hiring more and more people from traditional or big tech companies to come and work forward, because it's interesting, really interesting stuff. And, you're building the future.
Okay, so go and reach out to John. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond to you. You will get dozens of requests, I hope.
Yeah, awesome.
Once again, John, thanks so much for joining. It was really interesting, and it was good to connect with you again. I don't even know when we saw each other the last time. Must have been a while.
But anyway, it's been a while.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Post COVID, we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that.
Soon. Okay. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks everybody for watching. And if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing. And with that, we're done for today. Bye, everybody.
Awesome. Bye.